The rain has stopped, but the hide is still unfinished. A stone knife catches against bone. The edge breaks beneath your hand. There is hide left to cut, dusk between the trees, and a child by the coals whose smaller body will lose heat first. Retouch the tool and its shrinking edge gets smaller again, or keep cutting with a break. A dull red rock lies beside the fire. It will not help this child tonight, but locked inside it is a metal that later hands will heat, hammer, repair, and return to work. There was just one problem. You knew the rock held a secret, but the heat required to unlock it was a sun-like temperature you couldn't even imagine. Iron melts at 1,538 degrees Celsius, a fire hotter than any human had ever built. And yet, somehow they made iron. How could they free it if their furnaces could not melt it? Stone tools could be extraordinarily sharp. Flint and obsidian can take edges finer than many metal blades. But repairing a damaged edge meant chipping it smaller. Every fix shrank the tool. A bad break could end it. Copper and bronze offered a different bargain. A damaged edge could be reshaped instead of shrinking toward nothing. That repairability made metal worth pursuing, even when the iron inside a rock refused to behave like copper. And here's where the story gets strange. Humans used iron before humans knew how to make iron. Because the first iron didn't come from the ground. It fell out of the sky. Chemical analysis identifies meteoritic nickel iron, metal that arrived ready-made, in some of the earliest known iron objects. Tutankhamun was buried with a dagger made from it, confirmed by its nickel-rich composition. Egyptian text used a phrase commonly translated as iron of the sky, although its meaning changed across time, because it arrived already metallic. Meteoritic iron could be shaped without ore extraction, but its scarce, irregular supply kept it on a very exclusive waitlist. The far larger source remained trapped in ordinary rocks beneath people's feet. Its atoms were joined to oxygen, the same partnership that makes rust, and ordinary open fires could not separate them efficiently. Copper gave metalworkers an earlier path. Native copper, small amounts already present as metal, could be cold hammered without smelting. Later furnaces extracted copper from copper-bearing ores, although the location and circumstances of the first successful smelting remain unknown. Mixing copper with tin produced tin bronze, a hard and useful alloy, two metals blended into one material. Tin sources were unevenly distributed. A bronze workshop could have copper, fuel, molds, and skilled hands, and still stop because its tin was several kingdoms away with no tracking page. Iron ore was much more widespread. It was also much harder to process. Bronze was a miracle, but it was a fragile one. If the trade routes closed, the tools stopped. Ancient smiths weren't looking for iron because it was better. They were looking for it because it was everywhere. If only they could figure out how to break it. You drive the bellows until heat presses against your face and smoke dries your mouth. If the charge fails, a day spent gathering ore, making charcoal, and working the bellows is wasted, while the needed edge remains unfinished. The ore still does not collapse into a shining pool. That was the problem. Bloomery furnaces generally worked hundreds of degrees below iron's melting point. No matter how fiercely the charcoal burned, there would be no shining pool of liquid iron. Melting was out of reach. Separation was not. Inside the charcoal, an invisible reaction was already making that possible. Bloomery furnaces packed iron ore with charcoal and pushed air into the burning fuel. The precise route to the first successful process is unknown. Experimentation, adaptation from other kinds of smelting, and accidental successes are all plausible. Evidence for bloomery iron production becomes clearer in parts of Southwest Asia during the late 2nd millennium BCE, while earlier finds and claims of priority remain disputed. Inside the furnace, charcoal burning with limited oxygen produced carbon monoxide. That gas acted like a magnet, reaching into the rock to pull the oxygen out and carry it away in the smoke, leaving only the iron behind. When the furnace was opened, those particles formed a porous bloom, iron tangled with slag, the glassy waste produced from minerals in the ore. It didn't look like the birth of the Iron Age. It looked like a filthy sponge. The bloom is dragged from the furnace while it is still hot enough to glow. The bloom's weight pulls through the tongs. Measured blows jar your wrists as they press iron together and crack brittle slag free. Sparks sting bare skin. Pause too long and the loose mass cools before it becomes a workable bar. Another worker braces the tongs and turns the bloom between blows. Your timing has to match because neither person can release it safely. At larger production scales, the work could involve many more hands. People sorting ore, making charcoal, repairing furnace clay, keeping air moving, and shaping the hot bar. Dependability likely grew as communities remembered results, compared poor blooms with better ones, and taught the work onward. Early wrought iron, iron consolidated by hammering and usually carrying little carbon, was tough and repairable. Its hardness and sharpness varied with the ore, carbon content, trapped slag, heat treatment, and the smith skill. Furnace remains, slag heaps, blooms, and finished objects show that variability, but not the names or exact sequence of the people who learned to control it. But getting the iron out was just the beginning. The next step wasn't just science. It was an obsession with the fire itself. Iron heated in contact with charcoal can absorb carbon, with enough carbon to respond differently to heat rather than low-carbon wrought iron. Quenching, cooling the hot metal rapidly, can harden suitable steel, but it is not an automatic upgrade button. Low-carbon iron may barely harden, while the wrong temperature can leave steel brittle. Evidence for early steel appears in more than one region, including Anatolia and South Asia, but dates, definitions, and claims of a single first inventor remain contested. Later South Asian crucible steel, steel produced under controlled heat inside small ceramic vessels, became famous as a carefully managed high-carbon material. Its reputation eventually traveled farther than the details of its manufacture. The breakthrough was not an unbeatable weapon. It was control. Iron ore was geographically more widespread than tin, but abundance was only potential. Finished iron still demanded charcoal, furnace space, and hours of hammering, over centuries and at different speeds. Growing skill let more communities make repairable axes, plows, knives, fittings, and weapons without depending on the same tin networks. Iron shifted from scarce object to ordinary infrastructure, an ancient rollout with no clean version numbers. So how did ancient humans go from discovering iron to making it, if their fires couldn't even melt it? The dull rock beside the fire was never worthless. Its iron was joined to oxygen, and ancient furnaces learned to make charcoal gas carry that oxygen away. The metal emerged solid, dirty, and unfinished. Human hands made it useful through heat, timing, and repeated blows. The rock that held the iron did not change. The process around it did. The fire that once held back the rain became a furnace. An easy-to-ignore stone became an ancestor of the steel that still surrounds you, not because ancient people found a hidden element, but because they learned to break oxygen's grip on iron-bearing rock. That red rock would not finish the covering before night. Its promise belonged to later hands, an edge that could be reforged instead of steadily chipped away, saving material and work each time it returned to use. Different hands hold the tools now. The chain between skilled work and another person's survival has not broken. As iron spread into both tools and weapons, it entered an older human problem. How do people keep anger, injury, and revenge from becoming a blood feud? That question is next. If you made it this far, thank you. Subscribe so the next story finds you. The fire is still burning. Primitive Secrets sign off.